Good morning. Welcome to the March edition of 30 Minutes with LinkSpring, our monthly webinar series hosted by LinkSpring subject matter experts and special guests. I'm Mark Peacock, Chief Communications Officer and Vice President Marketing at LinkSpring. From all of us, we thank you for joining us. Today's subject is on Niagara 4 hierarchies. Today, Amanda Toomey, part of our IEC development group and member of LinkSpring's crack training team, will look at Niagara 4 hierarchies. She's going to examine all facets of creating a user-friendly data model-based navigation tree in Niagara 4 using the new hierarchy features. She'll cover simple hierarchy creation as well as each of the level definitions along with how and when to use them. A couple other things that she'll look into and we'll discuss today is how to scope the hierarchy results and display only those results that we want to show the end user. We're also going to cover some advanced topics like using the context query to create a layered tree that organizes itself based on the results of other queries. And finally, we're going to review how custom tags and relations can play a part in creating the navigation schema. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Amanda.
Good afternoon, everyone. So a couple of things you're going to need to look at before you begin with your hierarchy. This is a navigation scheme, so you're going to want to decide what type of structure that you will need for your user to be able to navigate. You can build as many hierarchies as you want for different users to have different access, but you will need to decide what it is that you want that to look like. So for our examples today, we've basically created a structure that is a set of buildings. So we have a site, we've got buildings, we've got floors, rooms, and then we have control points within those rooms. The next thing you'll need to do is determine which tags that you are going to use to indicate each layer of that structure. As you're aware, tagging is the important thing to make things work in N4. So each of those components, you're going to need a tag with whichever tag you plan to call, and you'll see that a little bit later. Don't forget, you can add additional tag dictionaries or create a tag dictionary if you need custom tags. You do have to have the Haystack dictionary installed in order to be able to use some of the features we talk about a little bit later. As I said before, you can create multiple hierarchies. Each of the components can have multiple tags. So if you need different tags for different hierarchies, that's fine, you can do that. And you can also create some custom relationships that you'll have to manually add to your points and folder structure, which we'll look at here in just a second. So those custom relationships, you are going to create within your custom dictionary. Open it up, open up the tag dictionary palette. There is one that will say relation, and underneath your custom dictionary there is a section that says relation definitions. You'll drag that relation over into the relation definitions, and then you'll want to give it a descriptive name. So because we have our setup based on a structure site, I've got a site relation, a building relation, floor relation, and room relation. Once I have those created within my custom dictionary, I'm going to go over to the wire sheets. You can also do this within the nav tree. For each level that you want, you have to define that relationship. You can do that by right-clicking on the parent folder, select the relation mark, which is in that right-click menu, then go down and right-click on your child folder. There's a relate to that appears. You'll want to relate it to that parent folder. And then, as you can see on the right side there, there is a list of choices where you can choose what the appropriate relationship is. So it'll give you some that are built into Niagara, and then you'll also see those custom ones that you created as well. You will have to also do this for the components. So as you go down your file structure, when you get down to where you have those points and things, you'll need to also relate those. So we've got all our relationships in there. We've got all of our components tagged. What do we need to do next? Go ahead and open up the hierarchy service. That's just a simple double click. Then you'll also need the hierarchy palette. Open your new palette screen. And there is a hierarchy within that palette. That's just simply what it's called. You're going to drag it over into the hierarchy service. You need one of these for each different hierarchy that you're creating. So you're going to want to provide a descriptive name that you'll recognize later as who it's for. Underneath that, we get into how we actually are going to define these. So there are 5 different types of definitions that we can use in order to define our query. We can use a very simple query level def, which is what we'll talk about first, but we'll walk through all of these. They work in combination with each other, so we can stack them in order to create very complex hierarchies. As I said, the query level def is our very basic level definition that we've got. It creates a simple list of any items that have a given tag. So in this case, I have some items that are tagged with the Haystack Dictionary as an AHU. I put that into my query. Under that query level def, it's going to give me a list of everything that is tagged AHU. Notice from those top 2, my AHU 01, 02, this does not show anything underneath those tagged items. It doesn't show any of the children. It simply shows exactly what was tagged and nothing else. Our relation level def is going to give us the ability to, as you'll notice, start out with that query level def. We combine a relation level def on top of that. Now I have the ability to actually show the children of those points. So my AHUs are tagged as AHUs, and then those temp points underneath are the child of that AHU. And we can use that repeat relation option to actually go all the way down. So right now it's false. All I'm going to see is temp. If I change that to true, I'll see temp, and then I'll see those other components underneath it if I have any histories or other extensions. Our group level def is going to actually go above our query level def, and what this does is it creates a folder structure based on string tag values. So I can tag something. My custom dictionary, I use M, so I tag things as equip, and that will actually create a folder structure based on what the string value I typed into that equip tag was. In order to get any points under those folders, we then are going to need our query level def so that we can get our desired component types. So you'll notice I have tagged my boiler and pump folders as being equipment, and I typed in boiler and I typed in pump when I was tagging those. And then my query is that :point that comes with the Niagara auto tagging dictionary. It doesn't bring any additional folder structure with it. So you'll notice under my boilers, I have a boiler A and a boiler A. Those are in different subfolders, but because I have only used these group level and query level, I'm not seeing that additional folder structure. We'll need some extra components to do that. List level def and name level def work similar to our group level that we just had a minute ago. The difference is these kind of work in combination. So again, we're going to use a creative folder structure, but instead of using string values, this uses our marker tags. So in this case, I went in and I marked those same folders with Haystack Pump and with Haystack Boiler, and I dropped that in. So I've got my list level def at the top, and then I drop my name level def underneath that and tell it what those tags are. Just as we saw before, it's not going to bring in any of the existing file structure. It's not going to bring in any of the existing children until we've added some additional components to that. But it is an alternative if you prefer to use those marker tags rather than creating a string tag and going in and actually typing in that string every time. One of the things we can do regardless of what type of definitions that we're using is we can narrow the scope to a particular section of the station. So by default, it is just everything in the station that you're looking at. I can actually go in and I can tell it, okay, that's great, but I only want this hierarchy to be for site 1, or I only want it for site 2, or so on. That way we can narrow it down before we ever start making those initial queries. Getting a little more complex here. If we want to bring forward that folder structure that we have already sort of created in the station, what we're going to do is we're going to start using what is called the query context. It's going to still give us a very simple hierarchy using our query level def, but in this case, I'm going to actually click on my 2 arrows there beside the query context, so that I can create that context. And when I click on that, I'm going to get my normal box pop up, which looks sort of like the facets box. And you're actually going to define that query context. In this case, I just clicked and I typed in site ID, and then I gave it that was going to be HS:ID. This is where I told you earlier you would have to have that Haystack dictionary installed in order to have it do things later in this presentation. This is what it's doing. It is going to that Haystack dictionary that auto tags the ID on each of these, and it's calling that up and providing that as what the value for my site ID that I called that context is. So my first piece up here, I've got my query level def with that site ID that I created, and my query is going to be my custom tag of site that I had defined earlier and tagged on those items. If I want to see then the points within that, I'm going to actually have to have also my query level def telling me, okay, you've got your sites, which are my folders. Now I want to actually query the points within those, which is why I have that :point, because I want it to call it the point. But I only want the points to show up if they're actually within that particular folder. So that's where this and comes in, and we have this string, which is my :siterel, which was that relationship that we defined earlier using those relationship tags, that little arrow symbol, and then it's going to say if the siterel matches that Haystack ID that is within my site ID up under the query context. So what we'll get if we go to the next slide here is, oh, there's my query context box. I thought I had that in here somewhere. So creating my references here, if we click down a couple, so we click the two arrows, as I said, got a little ahead of myself, sorry about that. We're going to click the plus sign to add new facet. We're going to click where it says key. That's where I typed in my site ID. And then I'm going to, in the value field, type that HS ID, as I said a moment ago. Got a little ahead of myself here. So we defined which tags we were going to look for. That was our :site that we had. We can also use our logic operations here. So I can use my and my or and things like that if I need to narrow it down even beyond that site. So perhaps I didn't want to use my custom tag. Maybe I wanted to use some of those Haystack tags or the Niagara tags. I could use ands and things to narrow that down for my query. Then we get into, as I was saying, narrowing down the point within the given context. So again, I used that :point. I used my site. This is what's going to organize our different subqueries. When you come back and look at this later, you'll see you sort of wrote out here on the side what those different pieces were that I was talking about. The site reference, that's our custom relationship that we added. The Haystack ID, that's calling that Haystack ID marker. The site ID is what we provided up in that initial query that we just created. And therefore, that whole thing is going to say, only show a point for this folder if it falls underneath that site, as well as being a point on the system. So we do our query, we go ahead and run that. What that's going to bring up is it is going to, if you look under where I have my simple hierarchy there, it is going to bring up the site, because that was what my initial query level def had. And then it's going to bring up any points underneath that site. So you notice I no longer have that one folder that has each of the same type of point listed with no other structure. We kind of look at another a little more complex example. We can basically duplicate these relationships as many times as we would want throughout so that we can create this nice tree. As I said earlier, we're going to have a site. We're going to have buildings within those sites. Then we're going to have floors within those sites. And we're going to have rooms within those floors. And then we're going to have points within those rooms. And as we build this structure, we're doing that by combining queries or groups or lists over and over in order to get that structure that we're looking for. One nice thing to know is after you set this up and you go through the whole system, these do come along with your template. So when you're templating out those folders or your AHUs or whatever the case may be, your tags come along, your relationships come along, and these hierarchies will come along as well to help you out with using this in the future. So walking through this, kind of to create that bigger structure, what did I do? I started out with the same query level def that I did before. I have my m:/site. I have to create that site ID just like I did before so that I can reference it in the next one. That query context where I typed in site ID, this is one of those places where you're going to have to make sure that you are paying attention to your capital letters and that you're making things with unique names. So this is going to display the components with the tag site, which happen to be those folders. It's not going to display anything underneath those components. We're going to have to add some extra context in order to get those to actually display. Next thing I want in my list is I want my building. So again, I'm going to add a query level def in order to get those buildings. I have to create a new query context because this is not my bottom level. In this case, I called it building ID. We created the same way we created the site ID. I click on that key within the facets area. I want buildings to be organized so that my building folders are underneath my site folders, and I want those building folders to only be the folders that match the site that they fall underneath. So I've got my m:/building, which was my custom tag I used to tag those building folders, and then I've got my string again. I've got that m:/site rel, which is my relationship between the site and the building, and then I'm calling that haystack ID, and I'm making sure that it matches the site ID from the previous level higher. Now I want to add my floor in here. You'll notice this becomes very repetitive. What am I going to do? I'm going to add another query level def that's going to call that m:/floor that I tagged those floor folders with, and it's going to say I only want to see those that show up underneath that building with that particular building ID. And you'll notice now I've got my site, I've got my building, I've got my floor. I'm building up this structure of what I want the end user to see. One more level of query level def here. Same thing, I've got a tag called m:/room. I need to reference that. I need to give it a query context because I'm going to need one more layer for my point. I'm going to tell it, hey, I want to see only the rooms under that particular floor. Finally, we get down to adding our points. Works similar to what we saw before. I'm going to have my n:/points, and I'm going to tell it I only want to see points that are within that particular room. And you'll notice now I have my nice site, building, floor, room, and then the points under it type of structure. And now is the time to take a look at those questions that you may have.
Yeah, by the way, if any folks have questions, please use the question function in the software that we're using for presentation. We have received a couple already. Let me open those up. The first question that we've got, Amanda, why do you keep using HS:ID? What does this provide?
The HS:ID is Haystack goes through, and every single component on your Niagara station is given a unique identifier. And it's just a string of kind of letters and numbers that you can actually, if you go into the tag area, you can, under the implicit tags, find what that HS:ID would be, and it will show up there. What it's doing is it's allowing me to point at a very, very specific component rather than having to go in and manually tag specific components for everything in my station. So I don't want to have to do a lot of duplicate tags. I don't want to have to do any excessive tagging if Haystack is already providing me with that information.
Okay, good, thanks. Another question, is there a source for all syntax?
There is a Niagara help guide that has example syntax, and it's got pretty much what we've covered in here, and it will go in a lot more detail as far as those group level defs and the list level defs that we just sort of brushed over today. It's got a lot more information if you go into that help guide in your docs folder of your install directory.
Okay, great. Another question, could you have used a relation def to end your site example?
So for my point, yes, we could have done that. Since we were calling the folder above it, we could have said, just show me the children of that folder. We would have had to narrow it down a little bit if I had some other children in there, such as ramps or signs or anything like that, just to make sure that I was only getting those pieces that I wanted. But yes, we could have used the relation level def.
Right. Another question has just come in, and let me Oh, it's the same one? Thank you.
It's the dock hierarchies
Gotcha.
document that comes
Gotcha.
with your Niagara install. That's what the
Perfect.
document is.
If there are no more questions at this point in time, I'm going to go ahead and sum this up for us. Mark Peacock again. Thank you, Amanda, for a great presentation. We hope you've enjoyed today's webinar and you've learned a little bit more about Niagara 4 hierarchies, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Just as a reminder, actually two, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at any time through marketing@linkspring.com. And then finally, just want to remind you that our great training team has lots of Niagara 4 and other training opportunities available that we've got dates on. Just go to linkspring.com and you can refer to them. And we'd love to have you join one of our training sessions here locally. And if you want more practice on this, take a look at the Applied Niagara courses that are listed. And I think that would give you some more in-depth knowledge and training in and around this subject and lots more. So again, from all of us at LinkSpring, we thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks.